So, welcome. So this is like we've already done some work with subtle energy in the form of meridians. So we worked with meridian running and meridian flushing, and then we've done the chi cycle and the law of 5 elements. And now we're kind of just sort of focusing on subtle energy and looking at the different. Well, we've also done the figure eights as well, subtle energy as well. So we've done quite a bit on subtle energy already, but we sort of haven't really talked about what it is. So I guess we talked about Chinese medicine a little bit. We talked about the Tao and, about how energy needs to distribute through the meridians and how it reflects on organs and how they move through our energy field and our etheric field as well. And often it's a very interesting topic to people attracted to kinesiology. So my college has always been attractive to people who are interested in subtle energy and spirituality. So other colleges maybe not as much. Some college, like the PKP school, they do very little on it by comparison to what we do. And I've always been very interested in how subtle energy, relates practically, like to the physical, to the spiritual, and how it can support us in our healing journey and our spiritual awakening. And what makes it, I think, so interesting is because it's so neglected in our modern world. So in the world today, it's sort of like being cast aside and not really looked at seriously. And so I think many people are hungry for that knowledge. Many people are wanting to learn about it because it's the elephant in the room that no one's talked about throughout their life, and we often get an inkling that there's something more to how we're put together and how the universe is held together, but that little part's been missing. So there's often a big thirst for it. And what makes kinesiology a little bit different to other forms of subtle energy work, like Reiki and pranic healing and different things like that, is that it works with information as well. So it gives informational context to energy states, physical states, and biochemical states, and structural states, and in quantum mechanics, they talk about how the universe is just made up of energy, and they talk about how it's made up of hierarchies of information and energy. So they say information and energy. And so when we're doing kinesiology, we're tapping into both of those, the information side and the energy side. So the energy always has like an informational context as well. So we'll have an issue, a goal, there'll be emotions, and there'll also be energetic things that come up, which make it really interesting. So the unique thing about kinesiology is this information energy overlap, which seems to be, from what the quantum physicists say, is how the universe is put together. So we're kind of like restructuring from that quantum field level, which is something we'll sort of look at. And it's also a good bridge, where we're going into the mysticism, but it also has roots in modern science as well. So let's have a look at page 5, which is the introduction. So energy medicine refers to a type of healing that supports both the flow and balance of subtle energy within and around the body. For the advocates of energy medicine, so for the people that are pro-energy medicine, it is believed that subtle energy is an integral part of each and every living being and is essential for the continuation of life. It is believed that by supporting the body at the level of the subtle energy, then the mind, body, and emotions can be brought back into balance. So for advocates of subtle energy, by working and supporting the movement, flow, balance, communication, etc. of subtle energy, it can be a key ingredient in bringing the body back into balance. So what is subtle energy? So there are many models describing subtle energy. Most of them are connected to traditional cultures such as China and India, with a history that extends back beyond 5,000 years. Each of these cultures provides a type of map which describes the presence, nature, and movement of the subtle energy, which correlates with healthy functioning of the body, mind, and emotions. The development of these subtle energy traditions occurred progressively over thousands of years, passed down from master to disciple in a lineage. At different times during certain dynasties, there would be leaps in understanding, while in other dynasties, trends would change and progression would slow. So culturally, we're probably in a slow progression of subtle energy, and like, because technologically people are moving away from spirituality, I guess, and other things, by at a kind of government level, at an industrial level, and things like that. But there's also no one being burnt at the stake. There's also, no one being sort of cast out into the wilderness because they're dabbling in certain things. So there's also a lot of experimentation happening and a lot of cross-pollination happening as well, and a lot of awakening happening, even though it's not it's not like part of a cultural norm yet. So it's actually quite good times because we have access to so much information about different cultures and things like that. So in one way it's not good, in another way it is really good as well. So interesting, like kinesiology is probably the most advanced in Australia of any country in the world. And a lot of it is because we're not highly regulated in terms of complementary healthcare. So you can pretty much do anything and not get arrested. But if you do harm and if you break certain rules, you will get arrested. But if you don't do harm and you don't break any rules, then you won't get arrested. So like, for instance, like for like giving people advice on supplements or things like that, it's all based around being in a position of power. So if I'm in a position of power and I give someone bad advice, and bad advice means it's outside the norm, and they have a bad reaction to it, then that puts me into a potentially civil and criminal level of prosecution. But if I give someone good advice and I don't have the qualifications, then I'm actually okay. Or if I give them what's considered good advice and they have a bad reaction, then I'm still okay. But if I give them, so it's quite liberal in how it works. And it's all based on how the person sees you and what advice you give. So if I was at a party and half drunk, and there was another person at the party, and they asked for advice, and I wasn't, a therapist or whatever, and I gave them advice, and they took it, and they had a bad reaction to it, that because I wasn't in a position of power, and they were just following some advice at a party, I wouldn't be culpable. But if I was positioned as a therapist and they came in and I gave them the same advice, then I could be culpable. So, and when we do legal and ethical guidelines, you'll see more about that as well. But anyway, but based on how the laws work in Australia, you know, there's a lot of people who've just been experimenting, messing around with different types of therapy and different types of kinesiology. And we've probably produced a lot of the diversity in kinesiology around the world, and probably been able to, you know, create really good programs by comparison to other places. So, and that's because we've been allowed to experiment. So, you know, like in America, they have like very strict laws around things. Also in Europe, they have very strict laws around things. So it stopped a lot of the experimentation, which is unfortunate. So yeah, so it's a time of great experimentation because of all the different types of knowledge that are available now. But there's also a lot of knowledge being lost as well. There's a lot of things that are getting misunderstood because a lot of the more mystical stuff is all based around context. You know, it's like the Aboriginals, they don't want to tell you stuff because you don't understand the context of their culture. You don't understand the context of what they're telling you. So they tell you like a mythological story about something that has like, you know, real meaning in relation to how they live. If you hear it, you'll probably just think it's cute or quirky and not really understand the depth of it because you don't understand all the other things that have been painted into their culture that give it meaning. And so they don't want to just dissipate that knowledge to people who can't interpret it, just sort of disrespects it. So a lot of it's more about don't tell anyone if they can't understand it or they can't put a context to it. It's not really well, most of them don't really want to keep it secret. Most of them just don't want to, you know, have it mocked because it's not that people don't have the frameworks to interpret it properly. Okay, so the development of these subtle energy traditions occurred progressively over thousands of years, passed down from master to disciple. At different times during dynasties, there would be leaps in understanding, while in other dynasty trends would change and progression would slow. So we're just having a look now at what it means to be, you know, where we are. So, and I find that, you know, like I really enjoy, you know, taking people through a 2-year training because I can sort of like help you develop concepts around energy and spirituality and consciousness over a 2-year period. But if I was just doing like random workshops and stuff like that, it wouldn't be very inspiring for me because people can't assimilate stuff that quickly. But you could give them the information, but it doesn't really have the relevance for them unless you've sort of got time to create the layered understanding and experience that comes with having a period of time to work with stuff like this. Traditionally, the understanding of solar energy would be influenced and underpinned by 2 adjacent traditions, healthcare and spiritual traditions. So here we have spiritual tradition, subtle energy, and healthcare. So often the subtle energy, you know, feeds into spirituality. So, you know, in yogic practices, they work with chakras and things like that. In Qigong as well, they work with like meridian energies and different energy centers like dantians. And they have like a subtle energy component, and that's helping to build their spirituality, but also in their healthcare. So in Chinese medicine, it's all based around the principles of the subtle energy and the elements, which are energetic in nature. In Ayurveda and things like that, it's all based around the pranic nature of how things are composed and what pranics need to be supported in the body in order to create healing. And so, yeah, so the spiritual traditions and healthcare, they kind of call on the reflections of subtle energy and the awarenesses of subtle energy. So spirit traditions have influenced the framework of how soul energy was both worked with and understood. The general idea behind a spirit tradition relates to the care and development of the soul. Each tradition would contain a set of rules and practices that were intended to support individual soul development over a lifetime, making a way for a better afterlife. The healthcare in traditional cultures was very connected to what was going on in the spirit world. Shamanic practitioners would work with the spirit world on behalf of their patients to facilitate change to their health and well-being. The herbs and food were used in medicine would also be linked to an extended mythology back to the world of spirit. The healing herbs and potions from nature would have a spiritual value to the practitioner and patient rather than a chemical one. So we could see, the perspective of chemistry and biochemistry and nutritional medicine and things like that, also as a type of pathology, as a type of mythology. So it's a scientific mythology. And then you have different cultures that have different mythologies. So, if you went into the Amazon and found some bark or something of a tree that cured cancer, and it was shown to do that, and then some scientists go into the forest and they take the bark and they analyze it. If they can't isolate something that can be turned into pharmaceutical, well, they're just not interested, so they'll just leave it. So even though it might work, if they can't scientifically validate what's in it to make it work, then they'll just dismiss it. So if it doesn't fit into their mythology, even though it works, they'll dismiss it. So it's just different types of mythology, really. And chemistry is another type of mythology, which I'm sure a lot of chemists wouldn't like. And it's not a bad mythology, it's a good mythology. It's awesome chemistry, I find it fascinating. But it's just another way of looking at the world. You can look at the world through myths and legends, or you can look at it through the chemical mythology. Soul energy could be viewed in three but connected ways. So the first way is as the matrix of energy that binds the soul to the physical body, enabling life. As the matrix of energy that connects us to the spiritual realms. So as the matrix of energy that connects the earth and the natural world around us. So I always like the feeling of going into like a pristine forest in the early morning. So, and you can just feel this web of energy that's sort of knitted through the forest overnight. And as your body walks through it, you can feel it sort of bristling up against your energy, cleaning it, nurturing it. Has anyone felt that before? Yeah. So that's like the matrix that connects us to the earth and the natural world around us. So a lot of kinesiology is all about number one. So it's a lot to do with working with the matrix of energy that binds the soul to the physical body, enabling life. So that's like a major component of the kinesiology. So here, you've seen me draw this before. We have like the spiritual aspect, and you have the mind body, and then you have the spirit connecting in. And when this disconnects, then we get, a whole level of disconnections throughout the body. So we talked about that when we were doing the KPA, when we were looking at setup. And we're saying, so you get disconnections in the brain, so neurological disconnections and physiological disconnections and structural disconnections, and then you kind of get energetic disconnections, chakras and meridians and auric fields, etc., having little disconnections in them. And then also on a cellular level, bits of the cells that have little disconnections in them. And so you get these little glitches that set up across the whole being, which are representations of that disconnection. And so, you know, that spiritual aspect weaves in energetically into the physical body as one of the representations of that connectivity. And then we get information about all these other things in our body, in our like our mind and emotions and our neurology are all kind of represented across the whole spectrum of our being. And a major part of, you know, how that's looked at is the energy matrix of this isn't nesting into the physical properly. So there's a breakdown in the communication between the two, and then all these kind of dysfunctional processes of the mind start to set up as a result, because instead of just operating from that knowing through that connection, we start to operate from over-analysis and over-evaluation. And so, this is like one order of our being, the physical, and then this is the other order of our being, the spiritual. And the two orders need to be in communication in order for us to have optimal functionality. And we'll talk more as we go through this course about the difference, the physics of it. Like this realm is the realm of order, and this realm is the realm of disorder. And when these aren't in communication, then disorder or entropy takes over. When these are in communication, then the ordering principle is always helping us to align our health and our state of mind and our emotions and self-regulate them always back into balance in a changing world. But when it disconnects, then we start to overanalyze and over-evaluate as a way of trying to manage the disconnection, which in another way is a type of compensation. So when we're disconnected and things start to go wrong, and then we develop strategies to handle it, we're just compensating rather than finding the solution, which is that reconnection process. So that's a big part of what we're doing in kinesiology, is the matrix advantage that binds the soul to the physical body, enabling life. And life is the organizing principle that helps us battle entropy or disorder, which is the way this dimension runs. The term matrix of energy means that it is a complex that is complex and interwoven. How exactly it interweaves is not fixed, and it's quite hard to conceive for the average mind. However, this matrix is a conductor or conduit for both energy and information that enables life and the maintenance of the entire physical universe. A rock, an ant, or a blue whale have a matrix of subtle energy. However, a life form has a much more involved subtle energy matrix than, say, a rock. The more evolved the life form, the richer and more intricate their subtle energy matrix. The understanding and application of subtle energy's ongoing journey, it requires us to be truly open, letting go of both our preconceptions and our conditioning. So another interesting thing around subtle energies, if we look back at quantum mechanics again, one of the things that they notice in quantum mechanics is there's no such thing as an impartial observer, which kind of makes science slightly questionable, because science is all based on doing experimentation and witnessing the experimentation without influencing it to create a theorem based on the outcome of the experiment. But what they found with lots of different experiments is that depending on who's watching it changes the outcome, no matter how impartial they try to be. So the act of witnessing something influences it. So that means there is no absolute it state. There's always subjectivity to the objectivity that science strives for, which makes, it doesn't make science not valuable. It just makes it just one perspective that's influenced by other perspectives. And the other thing is with, the quantum mechanics is because you witness something, how you look at it when you witness it will change what it looks like. And so when you look at like so with an atom, you have like a nucleus, and then you have an electron field around it. And when you're not looking for an electron and you're not looking at it, it goes into this diffuse field. It doesn't actually have any particles in it. But if you go, I want to find an electron, and you start looking at the field, you'll find electrons in it as little particles. So they kind of blink into existence when you look at them, and when you look away, they just disappear into a field, a probability field. And I think that's what happens with our subtle energy as well, because it's like a field and it's subtle. How we look at it will influence it. And so if you look at it from the framework of the Taoist who's studied Chinese medicine all his life, when he looks at it, he'll see, you know, meridians and what have you. But if you look at it from a yogic practitioner who's been studying yoga all their life, when they look at it, they'll see chakras and auric fields and nadi channels and things like that. So their predisposition to their education and culture causes them to see the field in a slightly different way. And so when they interact with it with their way, it brings balance, even though it's a different form of interaction. But it's still a system that takes into account the being holistically that they're working with. So that field that we're looking at can be quite different. And it's quite popular now for people to want to remove their chakras. Like there's a whole movement about chakra removal. Huh? Yeah. So there's a whole. It was probably less popular now. It was popular a few years ago. People removing their chakras. So. Huh? Well, I guess they're changing their mindset around things and wanting to interact differently with what they understand as their field, I guess. I don't know. But, you know, and I noticed when I was doing research for higher chakras, so, you know, you've got the 7 major chakras and you have minor chakras, but then you also have these higher chakras, which are like, or celestial chakras or whatever. So they go up to like 12 or 13 or 22 or whatever. So I go up to 13 in my system. But I remember, you know, 20 years ago when I was researching it, I'd go to the Circle bookshop. Do anyone remember the Circle bookshop? They had like, you know, so many cool esoteric books, and I'd go in there and I'd be reading them all. And I got a good relationship with the people that worked there, and just let me read them. I wouldn't have to buy them. And everything, every book that I read on the higher chakras was completely different. They had a completely different system, completely different mythology. Yeah, it was just quite interesting how variant they were. So, you know, the more subtle things get, the more, I guess, when people witness them, they interpret them differently, and how they're predisposed changes how they see it. So we've got this field around us, and our state of mind will alter how we perceive that field. And one of the interesting things about kinesiology is that we move through all these different contextual, cultural things. So we can look at the 7 major chakras, we can look at the minor chakras, we can look at the outer body or high chakras as a framework, and then we can switch to Chinese medicine framework, and then a modern medicine framework, and then we can let them all splice together. So we're, as kinesiologists, we're open to all the different frameworks potentially, and whichever one delivers the result for the client at the time, that's what we work with. And we're in a unique position to just experience how all these things fit in. And it's such an exploratory, enriching journey doing kinesiology, because we're learning all the time how all these like pieces fit in uniquely for these individuals, and it just continues to educate us as we practice. So kinesiology and subtle energy. Previously, those that worked with subtle energy were considered gifted. They would see, feel, or hear in such a way that the subtle energy realms were tangible. The process of kinesiology has enabled everyday individuals to access and detect stress in the subtle energy matrix of an individual with an extremely high level of specificity and accuracy. Kinesiology is also able to interpret exactly what these imbalances require in order to reorganize the subtle energy back into balance. Initially, the kinesiology student relies on the mechanical skill of muscle memory to inform about the state of the body's subtle energy. However, after a short while, the intuitive capacity and ability to sense changes in the fields of energy start to become real and tangible. So the muscle monitoring allows us to get information about the state of chakra, the state of meridian, the state of the auric fields, the state of the figure 8 energies around the body, etc. So while we can't necessarily see them, we can get information about them. And you find over time, it starts to activate your own intuition. So your intuition will start to improve because, you know, you kind of like in the state of wonder when you work with someone and you go, oh, I want the chakras come up. I wonder which chakra it'll be. You might preempt that in your mind. And then it's not that. And you go, oh, so obviously whatever you were preempting wasn't right. And you were, you know, optimistically expecting it to be something or picking up incorrectly the subtle energy from that person. And then another time when you do it, it's right. Another time you do it, it's wrong. And over time, it starts to inform you passively about your own natural intuition. And so it just over time starts to hone it down. Eventually you go, oh yeah, I can see it now. But the other thing is when you start getting it, you start going, did I make that muscle test happen? Did I influence that, or was it the subtle energy? And that often sets up, or was it my intuition, or did I influence it? So that's the other thing that's where the brain goes when you start picking it. But you always have to be questioning your influence as well. Like you want to be as impartial as you can, but then there's also like a unique creative journey that you have with your client. So you have your unique energy, your client has their unique energy, and you kind of come together, and it's a creative exploration process of understanding. But by tuning in more and more to that state of true compassion, then you become less of an influencer in that creative blending. So we're going to look at one type of philosophy, which we've talked about the edge of in chapter 2, which was the Tao. And the Tao is a very nice philosophy because it's all about nature, blending with the natural world. I kind of like it, and it doesn't really have like central characters or in it, so it's kind of more kind of like a science of nature more so than an ism. So understanding the Tao. So the Tao is an ancient philosophy and spirituality that focuses itself on harmonizing with nature. The Tao does not itself refer to the whole of creation, and the Tao itself refers to the whole of creation and learning to understand its way. So the way of how things work. So the essence of the Tao is simplicity itself, which means that much of the Tao's practice is as much about unlearning as it is about learning. So as we, when we disconnect, then we start to analyze and evaluate, and that complexifies us. And then when we're presented with the spiritual truth, we often just analyze and complexify it to try and fit it into our lives, which is then propagating the disconnection. Does that make sense? So a lot of it is about how we unlearn just to reconnect back to the fabric of the universe. But there's learning and there's unlearning. Despite its underlying simplicity, Tao forms the root of traditional Chinese medicine, feng shui, tai chi, qigong, I ching, and much more, which are very complex. Like they're involved, very involved and complex. But the nice thing is that at the root of it is a simplicity of just being in harmony with nature. So the Tao has never formally become a religion as such. Some people have really tried hard, because its root is so simple and personal. So man and the Tao. So the Tao itself represents the universe and its nature, the way. So to enter into a Taoist journey is to learn how to harmonize with the natural flow of the universe. To flow against the universe's natural flow, it means that we're going against the power of the whole universe. We meet an unsurmountable resistance that inevitably wears us down, diminishes our health, impedes our joy, and shortens our life. So, which is great. So we're either flowing with the universe or we're flowing against it. And it's a little bit like using a power boat to get somewhere, or using a sailboat. So when we're working with Tao, it's sort of like we're using, we might want to go over there, but we're using like the wind and the currents and stars to guide us, to direct us. So we're kind of like tuning into the existing natural forces to get to where we want to go, as opposed to just going in a straight line with a big power boat, burning up lots of energy. So it's a little bit like that. Also, the idea of going against the natural flow is also compensation. So when we're disconnected and we're in this sort of hyper-analytical and evaluative model, then we tend to just keep disconnecting and keep kind of using resources in order to try and get somewhere. But when we're connected, then we're not compensating, we're just moving. So the Tao is about going with the flow, sounds easy. However, we are carrying thousands of years of ancestral programming that tells us the reverse. So even though, look how easy it is, let's just go with the flow and harness the power of the universe and just glide along with life. You go, great, let's all want to do it, but it just doesn't seem to happen like that. We don't seem to just drop stuff immediately in order to do that. So that gives us a great business, and it's called Kinesiology. So what we're trying to learn is that capacity to resolve our stress rather than compensate for our stress. So instead of being the fixer, we're kind of learning how to let go and reconnect with our spiritual nature so that we can move with our effort through our existence. So the Tao, mankind, heaven and earth. So here we have how the four principles, I guess. So the Tao is everything. And then we have polarity. So we have the polarity of heaven and we have the polarity of earth. And then man sits in the middle. And we're in this sort of like exchange. We exchange energy with the heavenly forces. So that's like the spiritual realm. And then we're exchanging energy with earth. So one of the ways we exchange energy is like when I talked about walking through the forest in the morning, and you can feel the matrix of energy in the forest kind of caressing through you. But it's also chemical through eating food and, letting our waste go back into the earth and things like that. There's an exchange happening at a physical level, but also at a subtle energy level with the earth. and the heavenly is like the higher dimensions connecting in with the physical. So because we are embodied as man or woman, the whole process of describing the elements of the Tao naturally comes from our perspective. So here man's in the center, but that's only because we've put ourselves there because that's who we are. So it's natural that we put ourselves in the center. So the Tao is everything which encompasses heaven, earth, and man. Heaven can be understood as man's potential or destiny. So that's one way they describe it in Taoism, our potential. So when we don't have to live our potential, we can live below our potential. Don't have to follow our purpose, as we can see, as most people don't. They'll follow bits of it, but they won't fully embrace it. Which relates to the realm of spirit and is considered to be yang or masculine. So heavenly is the yang. Earth is the realm of the manifest, the physical, and is considered yin. Man exists as a dynamic interplay of heaven and earth within the Tao. So we're a dynamic interplay of the heaven and earth energies held within the framework of the Tao. So one of the best ways to understand the process of man as a dynamic expression of heaven and earth is to look at the anatomy of a tree. A tree is a much less complex organism than a human. However, the energy, structure, and physiology show a living and tangible expression of how this process occurs. So if you look at a tree takes the shape of what they call a toroidal donut. So if you look at the tree, it's like the inside of the donut. So you've got like this. There's a canopy, there's the roots. And then if you take there's like a field around it, and it goes all the way around the tree, making a donut. So it's a toroidal donut. And you've got the roots. And the roots are drawing water up and minerals into the canopy. Like that. And then you've got the leaves, and the leaves have little holes in them called stomata, and they take in carbon dioxide, and they're designed to take in light. And so the air and light are like the heavenly components, while the water and minerals are like the earth components. And the light is coming from the sun and the stars, so it's like cosmic. And then in the leaves, with you got the air and the minerals coming in. Sorry, the air and the light coming in, and then the water and minerals go up into the leaf, and then the little chloroplasts, which are the photosynthetic units inside the leaves, alchemize the water, the carbon dioxide, and the light to make glucose or fructose or something, lactose or whatever. So they make sugar. And sugar is a chemical energy in it. And so it's like a type of alchemy that's happening in the leaf. So there's an alchemic process happening in the leaf. That's more of a mystical thing. We could just say it's photosynthesis, which is a chemical mythology. And so then the energy of that will go down into the roots. and then it'll give the roots energy to keep absorbing the water and the minerals. And then the water and minerals come up, and then they go into the leaves, and then the leaves photosynthesize, and so that you've got a toroidal donut in terms of the flow pattern. So you've got this flow pattern, and you've got this spin happening in a toroidal donut, and that spirals around. So the tree is a representation of that exchange between heaven and earth, and then an alchemic process creating an energy source which is utilized and allows the tree to continue its life. And so basically that's the essence of what's happening in the Tao with man. So we've got the heaven and earth exchange and man, and certain forms being created that support that energetic exchange. Just like we have meridians. So within the meridians, remember this was the meridian thing. So when we're in this position, all the yin meridians go up the body. And when we're in this position, all the yang meridians come down the body. So because we are embodied as man, the whole process of describing the elements of the Tao naturally comes from our perspective. The Tao is everything which encompasses heaven, earth, and man. However, what am I reading that for again? The tree is made possible by the heavenly support as sunlight and carbon dioxide, and the earthly support as water and minerals. There is an alchemic process initiated by the tree, where these four elements are present, which sustains and builds the whole organism. The upward flow from earth is akin to the yin meridians, and the downward flow from heaven is akin to the yang meridians. The tree literally keeps the heaven and earth in communication. When there is an abundance of healthy trees and plants, the weather patterns modulate to support the balanced ecosystem of the planet. So when you start chopping down trees, you stop clouds forming, stops rain, and you create deserts. So it might be initially a good agricultural solution, but in the end, it will just create a desert. And so then the weather becomes more violent. The environment on the earth becomes more violent because you chop down all the trees. So the weather patterns and the soil feed the tree to be strong and healthy, but then the tree, as it propagates, feeds the environment to support the growth of the tree. So it's a two-way interaction. So it's not just the tree being supported by heaven and earth. Heaven and earth are also supported by the presence of the tree, because it's a refined module of exchange. Does that make sense? So hence the interdependence model. So everything within that model is interdependent on all the other components within the model. Nothing's isolated. So it's that isolated mind, that isolated identity. That's the ego. Anything that keeps you separate from the whole, that causes you to stand apart and be separate, is the ego. And there's a healthy amount of ego, which creates like a unique journey of creativity. And then there's a pathological part of the ego that just shuts you down from the interdependent exchange that you have with the universe. So interdependence. So kinesiology and the Tao are about restoring our interconnection with the universe. In order to establish a universal interconnection, we need to understand that all things are interdependent. Nothing exists as an independent identity. So if we take, the water away, the tree doesn't exist. We take the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere away, the tree doesn't exist. We take the light from the cosmos away, the tree doesn't exist. So seen in one way, it's a tree with a unique identity. There's a beautiful tree sitting in the field. But seen in another way, it's just an interdependent expression of all the natural forces at play in the universe. And we are the same. You take our air away, you take our food away, you take our water away, you take our freedom away, and we cease to be, cease to exist. So we're interdependent. So kinesiology and the Tao are about restoring our interconnection of the universe. In order to establish a universal connection, we need to understand that all things are interdependent and nothing exists as an independent. So to take any one of these away means the tree ceases to exist. So in one way, it is a tree. In another way, it is an independent part of nature. The ego can be understood as that part of the psyche that attempts to make us separate, where the truth of nature and the Tao suggests that we are actually all part of an endless chain of interrelated variables. When the ego loses its balance, the excessive perception of a separate identity cuts us off from the interdependent support of the universe and the Tao. So the Tao as the way gives the aspirant methods, philosophies, and techniques to reconnect with universal flow. Kinesiology as a therapeutic technique allows us to look at restoring the interdependent connections of our individual self with the universe. So essentially, that's all we're doing. We're just reconnecting us with the web of creation, where we've cut ourselves off for some reason. So we can transpose the previous illustration of the Tao with the kinesiology process to come up with a new understanding and approach to kinesiology based on Taoist principles and philosophy. So this is just a model. So this is looking at the connection between heaven and man, and that's principally subtle energy. So through subtle energy, there's a communication with spirit. And then looking at man's perception of himself, we perceive ourselves, or herself, we perceive ourselves, mentally through our own mental activity of what's going through our mind, how we interpret our feelings, what we're feeling at any given time, the feelings that we've got unresolved, and then our senses, so what we smell, what we taste, what we see, what we feel, what we hear. These are all kind of like our own subjective experiences as an individual, man or woman. And then we have the earth, which is like the material realm. So it's like our anatomy, our physiology, our nutrition, are all fed through the earth. And so all these are like the three domains, if you like, breaking categories up into like that Taoist expression. And when we're doing the kinesiology, it's the Tao that's guiding the kinesiology. So there's that field intelligence of the all that's causing us to maneuver to different places where we're stuck and disconnected. Is that making any sense? So the mind, emotions, and senses are how humans experience the universe. It is via the mind that all our experiences are registered and perceived. The anatomy, physiology, and nutrition refer to the structure and function of materials that construct our body. The body is a vehicle which enables our human experience. The earth and nature is the supplier of resources that construct and maintain our body. Subtle energy is the interwoven and dynamic web of energy that connects the soul to the body and to our spiritual guidance. It is the facilitator of our heavenly connection, providing the spark that animates our physical body into radiant light. So from this understanding rooted in the ancient tradition of the Tao, we can construct the kinesiology triad. The triangle as a geometric symbol is unique in that all sides touch each other, meaning that each side is directly referenced by the other. It is an elegant form to describe the interdependence and relationship that is revealed during kinesiology balance. The triangle is placed in a circle which symbolizes the Tao. So when they developed the model for applied kinesiology, which was the first kinesiology model, they created a triangle. And then most people who then sort of went on to create their own kinesiology model, created their own triangle and put different things around it, which is kind of cute. But this triangle thing seems to be really strong in kinesiology. And And the triangle and the circle is kind of cool because that's like the Tao, which is the all-encompassing. So in applied kinesiology, the triangle kind of was like psych-emotional, and then they have biochemical, which is like nutrition, physiology, etc. And then they had structure because they're chiropractors, they have to have structure, which I'm all for as well, because I'm a big believer in form as a big component of energy, like the form of the tree has a particular shape with a toroidal donut, with the geometry of that is a representation of the dynamic interplay with spirit. So when your structure's misaligned, it's going to have an effect on that whole energetic interplay as well. So that's just another triangle. That's the original triangle. And here's another triangle, like putting it into the perspective of the Tao. So there's lots of different ways to organize the access to information through kinesiology. And so there's lots of modalities that organize things differently. And so here we've got subtle energy, which is the connection between heaven and man. And then we've got mind, emotion, senses, and that's man's experience of himself, his subjective experience of his own reality. And then we have anatomy, physiology, nutrition, and that's man's connection to earth, which is like the material that gives him a body. And so you've got this like interconnectivity of all these things coming together. So we are able to derive a kinesiology scan chart that enables us to work independently with the whole being. From the perspective of the dynamic unity of the Tao, below is a scan sheet broken up into the working elements of the Tao from a kinesiology perspective. This scan sheet incorporates most of the techniques from the first part of the diploma. So here we have the mental, emotional, the subtle energy, and the physical. So I don't actually use this. I just did it as a way to show you that you can break things up differently. So it's a different model to the one that we've used in the KPA and the KFP4, but I'm just showing you that there is no fixed way, and now I'll just reorganize it into a Taoist model, but also as a way of appreciating how the energetic and spiritual can reorganize your perspective and how all the different things relate from a kinesiology perspective. It's important to appreciate in both kinesiology and energy medicine that it is the interconnected relationships between subtle energy and the mental, physical, which bring the power of healing and transformation to life. For example, when we look at subtle energy and ignore, for example, the physiology, we become the same as the medical doctor who ignores the emotional or the subtle energy when he investigates a physiological problem in a client. By learning to understand the workings of the whole being, we are able to appreciate the interdependence of all our aspects and are able to work in a truly holistic way. Compassion means that we learn to apply whatever is required in order to deliver the optimal results for each of our clients. Energy medicine and kinesiology is not a hobby, it is a profound discipline and profession. So, yeah, so a lot of people working in kinesiology really get drawn into the energetic and like the emotional. That's often where people end up, and that's fine, but we're made up of all of these different elements, and you can't really neglect any of them because they're all part of what makes us up. And we need to be willing to dance with all those parts at any given time when our clients present. And then we're operating from a state of compassion because we're going wherever the client needs to go rather than where we like to go because of our own personal pleasure. Does that make any sense? So energy medicine and the ego. So as we mentioned earlier, the ego relates to the perception of a separate identity. The truth is that each of us has many identities as a collection of cells, as part of a family, as a workplace, society, economy, and ecosystem, as a set of archetypes. Each of us is part of many dynamic systems to which we contribute consciously or unconsciously. Each of these dynamic systems we participate in is another alternate identity which forms an expanded identity. Our identity as an individual human is but one identity in a set of interdependent identities. The ego becomes a problem when we fixate on our individual human identity rather than see and experience other expanded states of ourselves. So, you know, I've got my identity as Guy, and you know that forms lots of different identities. So, you know, me as a father, me as a kinesiology trainer, me as a kinesiology practitioner, and you know, in relation to my friendship circles and things like that, these are all sort of parts of my identity, and they're all things that I'm sort of conscious of. But then I've got me, you know, as part of, you know, the Brisbane community, as part of an Australian citizen, as part of planet Earth, as part of the solar system. So there's all these different, and then I've got like my cells, they're all like living individuals. And so I'm a collective of different cells. They all have an identity. So like I'm like this citadel of cells that are all kind of like working together to create me. And so I can kind of zoom in or pan out, and you know, and I can get fixated on any one identity at any point in time, or pathologically just get stuck in one identity over my whole life. And so yeah, there's a lot. So we want to be in a shifting state of identities that optimize our potential at any given time, rather than being just stuck in one. And so that's another. You've heard of archetypes before? So we have different archetypes, and we can get stuck in those. So I could be, you know, the teacher archetype. And so when I go out for dinner with friends, I could be teaching them the whole time. When I go home to my children, I could be teaching them. And I go out to, you know, on dates, and I can teach people I'm going on dates with. And yeah, and that could be just what I'm attached to as an identity, but it might not actually serve my highest potential. It might be good in this framework, but then in other frameworks, if I rely on that and just move it into those, it might be counterproductive. Does that make sense? And so certain identities need to kind of be fluid and sort of come in at different times. It's like, you know, wearing the wrong, going out to a dinner party and wear board shorts, and you go to the beach and you wear a tuxedo or something like that. They don't quite match in different environments. So you need to be able to shift identities depending on what's called for you in the environment. And often a lot of our problems in our life come from using the wrong archetype in the wrong context, because we're attached to that one and we're not open to other ones. And there's like 64 different archetypes that we have access to as humans, and they're reflected in the I Ching and the Tarot and the Tree of Life. They're all part of a geometric structure that goes all the way down to our codons in our DNA. And you know, they're all available to us. And if we're not fixated, which is what the ego is, it fixates, then we have access to all of them and can interchange with them at any point in time. So when we're carrying stress, our survival feels threatened, which causes us to automatically default to our individual needs above all else. So when we're traumatized and we haven't resolved the trauma, then we go into like survival type of default patterns. And when we're in those survival type of default patterns, we're very I focused as well. They're very focused on, resources and what I need to survive. So, and everyone's like that. Like if you put them into a situation where their life's threatened, they'll tend to, be more eye focused and look at what their needs are and not sort of care so much about the needs of other people because they need to survive. And that's a big part of what keeps us trapped in different structures, the trauma that we carry. And when that trauma releases, we tend to move more freely between those different archetypes and different states of how we identify ourselves for a higher purpose rather than a fundamental survival purpose. So releasing trauma is a big part of that. But then the problem is we're often, we live in a model of compensation rather than a model of resolution. And so people are very reluctant these days to resolve their trauma so that they can medicate for it, but that doesn't resolve it. And so we're big on that process of resolution versus compensation. So we previously identified that our existence is interdependent on an infinite set of interdependent variables. So we'll probably, is mine two ready? So when the ego identity, our perception as an individual human, is in harmony with our myriad of possible identities, then we are in a profoundly balanced state as we are living our interdependent nature. When our ego is out of balance and we are fixated on our individual needs inappropriately, then we disconnect from the potential of our interdependent exchange, cutting us off from source. As we disconnect from the Tao, then we fixate more and more on our individual human identity, where we analyze, compare, and evaluate ourselves and others in an attempt to right the wrongs. Effectively, we have been hijacked by the ego. The perception of an untrue separate identity is struggling to survive. From our own perspective, we are simply trying to fix and solve our problems. But the need to fix and solve wrongs is coming directly from the ego, which then propagates the separation. Kinesiology offers a way to bypass the ego mind and reconnect with the Tao. Unified field, God, whatever you want to call it. Any thoughts or comments on all of that?
So it was interesting you talking about how you could choose the one of the 64 archetypes. Like, is that something you work on or yourself, or is like you could play with identities and just slip between without ego attached?
Who's the I though? So as soon as well, I think like some people like so I was giving the example of the teacher archetype. So that gives me an income, it gives me status or whatever. And so then I could just feel safe in it because of those things, and then I can use it. Really, you don't want to play. Playing is probably a good word, but you don't want to strategize which archetype you're using, because then who's the I? Then it's the mind, because you're making a mental choice. So you just want to, you'll just naturally express the right archetype at the right time, rather than play it. Like, because it's actually like all that 64 structure, that number is at the root of our genetic expression. So we don't kind of choose which genes we express. They just do it naturally. Do you know what I mean?
That's all the human designs for that plays with all of that. That's actually.
Yeah, and so all the numbers are the same.
Kind of identify, yeah, it's just a play with expressions of that.
Yeah, well, it's like you become like through the kinesiology process, you become aware of identities that you're not accessing, and identities that you're attached to, and then you can make a choice. Do you want to keep using this identity inappropriately or step into a new one? And then if you choose to step into a new one, often you won't know what you're stepping into. Pardon?
It's just all a big paradox, isn't it? I find the whole concept with all of this because the more you explore and understand it, it's like
Well, it's not a it doesn't have a mental solution. It doesn't have a mental solution.
It's not a feeling. I'm just saying this because I am aware of sometimes the energetic heaviness of identity. I feel like I'm almost trapped in the identity of wife, mother, and I sometimes think about it like, and it just feels uncomfortable sometimes. Maybe because I'm wearing it too much, or it just sometimes it's restricted.
And do you know what identities you'd like to express?
No.
I guess you're tapping into the healer identity by doing this course. That's it for a new one that you're exploring. And then you're back in, learning again. So you're like a student identity rather than a teacher identity, which is part of what you do. So you're kind of exploring new ones. Yeah. So I often, because there's no identity, none of the identities are really wrong. They're just maybe overused because they're comfortable, and other ones are less comfortable. So there has to be that willingness to step out of your comfort zone into new ones. So it's not that those are wrong and they're heavy. It's more that there's ones that you're not expressing that's making those ones feel heavy. Then you just got to be open to expanding new expressions. And often it sometimes feel like, I've got to escape the ones I'm in order to express them, but that's rare. It's actually more, I just have to open into new ones within that. Yes.
Okay. Is this a conscious thing because struggling with there's no I, and that's good because it's kind of it's that thing that's looking through my eyes right now, whatever that is. That's just doing what it does, and it's there. But if I'm now a wife and a mother in those, then that's just expressing itself. If my child asks me something, then I will just know to do that thing, but it's not conscious. I don't know. So when a client is on the table and you're saying, maybe you should try it this way, or think about this archetype, like Carolyn Mace with the prostitute.
Well, I don't really do archetypal work as such. So what I try to do as a kinesiologist is help people open up to their potential rather than get over focused on frameworks, because an archetype's a framework. Those frameworks are available, but they should just modulate naturally.
Yeah, naturally. That's what I'm saying. It's not a conscious.
Yeah, so it's a
process.
So if we say look at the chakras. So if we have a look at the chakras, different chakras have different kind of portfolios. Like they're managing a different portfolio in your life. So you have like a throat chakra, for instance, and it has like a yin and yang state. So it has an outflow state and an inflow state, and it's a lot to do at different levels. It's a lot to do with communication. So at the moment, my throat chakra is in an outflow state, and your chakra is in an inflow state. So you're receiving through your throat chakra energetically, and I'm expressing through my throat chakra energetically. And that's good. But then you sometimes get people, who are in class who are interjecting all the time, asking irrelevant questions, talking about their whole life. And so and you can't, and so their throat chakra isn't modulating appropriately for the environment they're in right now. So, you know, if they were up here, they'd be great because they'd be really interesting, talking about their life, talking about this, talking about that. But they're over there listening. So it needs to be like inflowing, but it's obviously stuck in an outflow state and they don't know how to inflow. Well, it's not inflowing properly. So their chakra isn't naturally modulating to suit their environment. So you can look at it like that as well. So, you know, the modulation patterns in your chakras aren't naturally structuring to support the specific environment that you've been dropped into in this particular moment. And so then it becomes, when I unblock that chakra in this context, then next time I'm in that state, it won't behave the same way because it's not stuck in a pattern. So it's just, that's another way of looking at the same thing. Does that make any sense? And so I don't walking around going, okay, down modulate sacral chakra, up modulate heart chakra, down modulate throat chakra, up modulate yang state of throat chakra because we're going to lecture now. So it just happens automatically. Do you know what I mean? Just like stomach secrete hydrochloric acid and ileocecal valve closed, caloric valve open. So that happens automatically. But if I'm out of balance, it doesn't, you know, and then I start to get indigestion. But once you know, the fabric of my digestive process is working well, you know, all those valves are opening and closing, but I don't have to like open and close them myself, do I? Does that make sense? Cool. Well, let's have morning tea, and then we'll start actually looking at something more specific.